Catherine Graves hired a private investigator because she thought her husband was having an affair. Now, talk about misconceptions. There was no affair. In fact, he had a fatal brain tumor. Recently we heard about the struggle of Steve Jobs, but sometimes the fight is just as hard, even harder, on the family. Here's Catherine Graves, who writes about it in Checking Out. It's an in-depth look at losing your mind. You've been together for over a decade, my understanding is, and something just seemed to be different. It wasn't anything real specific, but what were you seeing?
His behavior had become pretty apathetic and less motivated to do things, and definitely less interested in me and spending time with me.
As his wife, what came to your mind? What were you thinking?
I was thinking that he was having an affair, and at that point we had begun marriage counseling, and the counselor, I think, kind of concurred with that idea that maybe he was having an affair or other engagements, maybe not just one.
Did you ever, at this point, suspect health problems that could be causing this behavior? Mm-mm. Wasn't something that came to
Wasn't even on the radar.
It got worse, even despite the counseling, right? I mean, to the point where you were very suspicious of him.
Yes.
So what did you do?
I hired a private investigator, which was probably a month before he got diagnosed. And I was convinced, and our accountant also was convinced, that there was something financially going on because money was unaccounted for that was missing from the business. And we thought maybe gambling, maybe drugs. Maybe drugs were the reason for the huge change in his personality. So I hired someone to follow him around to figure out what was going on. So we'd never been so disconnected before.
Did that person ever give you reports on what happened?
She phoned me the day I was leaving the hospital from his surgery. And she started to go into detail about how, the car hasn't really moved much. And I just told her what had happened. And she just was, obviously had never heard that one before. It's a reason for someone hiring a private investigator.
She literally said that?
Yeah, she's like, well, that's a first. So hopefully the last too. But so we went to the emergency room and got the CAT scan. And I do remember walking into the emergency room, and he looked at me as if he knew that he should know who I am. But yet I don't think he was sure how. And so that was pretty heartbreaking. And then I was, really scared. And we went into a little room, and 10 minutes later, Dr. Sander came in, the emergency room doctor, and said, "You have a giant tumor in your brain." And John started laughing. And I, of course, fell apart.
It must have been such a time of conflicted feelings for you. It's terrible news, but it was also an explanation.
Exactly. And there was definitely a sense of, at least, this wasn't about me. And, because for over a year, it was a horrible feeling thinking that my husband wasn't in love with me anymore. And at least I knew it had nothing to do with me. But, flash forward 10 seconds later but he has a giant tumor in his brain, and what does that mean? So
you said this, but this happened so fast.
And this sounds terrible to say, but I'll be the one to say it. When someone's suffering like that and you've been taking care of them and you're not taking care of yourself, it takes a toll, and you finally just want it to end. And so when it finally ended, it was almost euphoric in that I had some freedom. I hadn't left the house for almost 6 months. So I think that was part of the reason I kind of went a little off the deep end.
You're right. It is hard for people to say, but I think probably more people share that sentiment than they would ever admit to.
Right? I think so.
What should people take away from your experience who may find themselves in that situation? Maybe not even, again, just a spouse. Maybe I have a lot of friends of mine who they're caring for their parents now, and it is their entire lives. It's what they do. Mm-hmm. What do you tell them?
I tell people that they need to take time for themselves no matter what, because John did not want me to leave the house, and he did not want anyone to come in and take care of him. So I wish I would have found a way, and been a little selfish and left the house and done some things with friends, stayed connected to people, instead of just becoming a hermit. That's one thing I would highly recommend.
To have some attachments to your own life.
Yeah, you have to maintain that for sanity, I think.
What about now? Do you still think about him a lot? Your emotional state?
Just in the last 6 months, 9 months maybe, I've started to remember some really good, happy times, which I think for some reason those weren't coming to me. All that I would think about was kind of the negative, the end, the end of his life. But now I just remember how happy we were and that we had some great times, and he was a super funny guy, and I was always laughing, and so it's really nice.
Well, I think there's a lot of important lessons in there for people who are caring for their loved ones and trying to care for themselves at the same time. So,
yeah, that's the key. Right.
yeah, appreciate it.